Every Sigma male has a secret origin story, and it's rarely written in triumph. It's written in tears no one saw, in nights spent alone while others played, in betrayals that cut deep enough to rewire the soul. If you're watching this, you already know something others don't. Your painful childhood wasn't a curse, it was the forge. While other men were being shaped by comfort and approval, you were being tempered by isolation and disappointment. While they learned to seek validation, you learned something far more powerful. You learned to validate yourself. And that difference? That's what separates a Sigma male from everyone else. This isn't motivational fluff. This is the raw truth about how pain creates power, how childhood wounds become adult weapons, and how the loneliest kids often become the most dangerous men. Not dangerous in violence, but dangerous in independence. Dangerous in their refusal to need anyone. Dangerous in their ability to stand alone when everyone else crumbles. Before we dive deep into the 6 painful experiences that forged you, hit that subscribe button, because this channel isn't for everyone. It's for men who understand that strength isn't given. It's earned in the darkest moments of childhood. Let's begin. 1. The silence that became strength. You remember it, don't you? Those long afternoons when other kids were laughing in groups and you were sitting alone. Not because you weren't invited, though sometimes that was true, but because something inside you already knew that their noise was meaningless. While they were competing for attention, you were learning to live without it. That silence wasn't comfortable. It was suffocating at first. You'd go home, and the empty rooms echoed your isolation. Maybe your parents were working. Maybe they were there but emotionally absent. Either way, you learned the hardest lesson early. No one is coming to fill your silence with their presence. Here's what happened in that silence that other men will never understand. You started listening, not to others. There was no one to listen to. You started listening to yourself. Your thoughts became your companions. Your observations became your entertainment. You watch people the way scientists watch experiments, noticing patterns they couldn't see because they were too busy performing for each other. Take Marcus, a Sigma I interviewed last year. He grew up in a house where his father was physically present but emotionally dead. No conversations, no encouragement, just silence. Marcus told me he'd spend hours in his room just thinking. His classmates thought he was weird. His teachers worried he was depressed. But Marcus wasn't depressed. He was downloading a superpower. By the time Marcus hit his 20s, he could walk into any room and read it like a book. While other men were talking to fill space, Marcus was observing. While they were seeking approval, he was calculating. That childhood silence had taught him that the loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The most powerful person is the one watching, learning, and saying nothing until it matters. Silence became your strength because it forced you to develop an inner world so rich that external validation became irrelevant. You didn't learn to be quiet. You learned to be complete without noise. And that completeness, that's what makes other people uncomfortable around you. They can't fill your silence because your silence is already full. 2. Betrayal. As the first teacher. Every Sigma male remembers their first betrayal with crystal clarity. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because it was the moment innocence died and wisdom was born. Maybe it was a friend who spread your secrets. Maybe it was a parent who promised to show up and never did. Maybe it was a group that welcomed you in, only to mock you behind your back. That betrayal didn't just hurt your feelings. It rewired your entire operating system. You were probably young, 10, 12, maybe 14, old enough to trust, young enough to believe that trust was sacred. And then someone you counted on proved that trust is just a word people use before they use you. The pain was immediate. The lesson took longer. But once it landed, it never left. Here's what betrayal taught you that loyalty never could. People show you who they are when it benefits them to hide it. They'll smile while sharpening knives. They'll promise while planning exits. And the earlier you learn this, the more dangerous you become. Not in malice, but in awareness. I'll give you a real example. David was 13 when his best friend, the only person he'd trusted with his family problems, told everyone at school that David's father was in prison. The mockery was brutal. But something shifted in David that day. He didn't become bitter. He became strategic. He learned to compartmentalize information. He learned to test people with small truths before giving them big ones. He learned to watch for the micro-expressions that reveal character before crisis does. By the time David was an adult, he could spot a fake friend within minutes of meeting them. While other men were being blindsided by business partners, romantic partners, and fair-weather friends, David was already 3 steps ahead. He didn't trust less. He trusted better. He didn't close his heart. He installed a security system. Betrayal taught you that trust is earned in increments, not given in bulk. It taught you that loyalty is rare, and when you find it, you protect it like gold. But most importantly, it taught you that you can survive alone. And a man who can survive alone can negotiate from a position of strength that dependent men will never know. Your first betrayal hurt, but it also armed you. It gave you the ability to see through people's performances to their intentions. And in a world full of actors, that makes you the only one watching the real show. Loneliness that built self-reliance. Let's talk about the loneliness. Not the trendy social media kind where people post about feeling alone while surrounded by hundreds of likes. The real kind. The kind where days pass and no one texts. Where weekends arrive and you have no plans because no one made them with you. Where you look around and realize that if you disappeared tomorrow, maybe 3 people would notice. And 2 of them are family. That loneliness was your crucible. Other kids had safety nets made of friendships, social groups, and constant connection. You had yourself. And at first, that felt like poverty. You'd watch groups of friends laughing, going to parties, making memories, and you'd wonder what was wrong with you. Why didn't you fit? Why didn't they choose you? Why was connection so easy for them and so impossible for you? But here's what was really happening. While they were learning to depend on the group, you were learning to depend on yourself. While they were splitting responsibilities among 5 friends, you were handling everything alone. While they were learning to be part of something, you were learning to be something complete. Take the practical skills. You probably learned to fix things yourself because no one was coming to help. You learned to make decisions without consensus because there was no one to ask. You learned to entertain yourself because waiting for others meant waiting forever. You learned to solve your own problems because presenting them to others just made you feel more alone. I know a Sigma named James who spent every weekend of his teenage years alone. Not by choice initially. He just wasn't invited to the parties, wasn't part of the groups. So he learned guitar, then he learned to code, then he learned to invest. By the time he was 25, James had skills that took his former classmates, who'd spent those same years in social circles, another decade to develop. His loneliness had compounded into competence. Here's the weapon loneliness forged. Complete self-reliance. You don't need a committee to make decisions. You don't need validation to take action. You don't need company to feel complete. Other men collapse when their social structures fail, when friends drift away, when relationships end, when groups dissolve. You don't even flinch, because you've been alone before, and you not only survived it, you thrived in it. Loneliness taught you that you are enough, not in some affirmation poster way, but in the most practical, powerful sense. You can provide your own company, solve your own problems, and build your own life. And a man who needs nothing from others has everything. 4. Pain that sharpened perception. Pain makes most people bitter. It made you better. Not because you're special, but because you were forced to study it. When you're hurt young and hurt often, you develop a question that becomes your superpower. How did I not see this coming? That question turns pain into perception. Maybe it was physical pain, bullying, abuse, violence that taught you to read aggression before it strikes. Maybe it was emotional pain, neglect, criticism, disappointment that taught you to sense emotional weather before the storm hits. Either way, pain forced you to become a student of cause and effect. You started noticing the small signs that preceded big consequences. You learned that the friend who joked meanly would eventually betray seriously. You learned that the adult who ignored small promises would break big ones. You learned that discomfort you ignored early would become catastrophe later. Pain didn't just hurt you, it trained you to never be hurt the same way twice. Let me tell you about Raphael. He grew up in a volatile household where his father's mood could shift from calm to explosive in seconds. By age 8, Raphael had become a genius at reading micro-expressions. A slight tightening of his father's jaw meant danger in 10 minutes. A particular tone meant get out of the house. A specific type of silence meant violence was coming. This wasn't a childhood skill. This was a survival mechanism. But here's what happened. Raphael grew up with an ability to read people that borders on supernatural. In business meetings, he knows who's lying before they finish their sentence. In relationships, he senses disinterest before his partner does. In negotiations, he sees the leverage points others miss because he's reading what's not being said. Pain sharpened your perception in 3 specific ways. First, it made you hyper-aware of patterns. You notice when someone's behavior changes because you had to notice when danger patterns were forming. Second, it killed your naivety. You don't assume good intentions because pain taught you that intentions mean nothing compared to actions. Third, it gave you predictive power. You can see 3 moves ahead because pain forced you to always be calculating your next move. While other men are shocked by betrayals, you saw them coming. While they're surprised by failures, you prepared for them. While they're blindsided by people's true nature, you already knew. You just gave them enough rope to reveal it themselves. Pain didn't break you. It gave you X-ray vision for bullshit, early warning systems for danger, and pattern recognition that makes you seem almost psychic. The wound became a window. And through that window, you see things that comfortable people will never perceive. 5. Rejection that forged independence. Rejection is supposed to hurt. And it did hurt, didn't it? Every time you weren't picked for the team. Every time you were excluded from the group. Every time someone looked at you and decided you weren't worth their time, their friendship, their love. Those moments stung. They still do sometimes if you're honest, but here's what rejection really did. It killed your need for external approval and replaced it with something far more powerful, internal validation. You learned early that seeking approval from others is a rigged game. The goalpost moves, the criteria changes. What makes you acceptable today makes you weird tomorrow. So you stopped playing, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion. You got tired of reshaping yourself for people who would reject you anyway, and in that exhaustion, you found freedom. Think about the kids who were accepted, who fit in, who were popular. They learned that belonging requires performance. They learned to monitor how they're perceived, to adjust their personality for different audiences, to always be on. They're still doing it. Walk into any office, any social gathering, any relationship, and you'll see them, exhausting themselves to maintain approval they never actually secured. You learned rejection is survivable. More than survivable. It's liberating. I know a Sigma named Christopher who was rejected by every social group in high school. Too weird for the popular kids. Too quiet for the party crowd. Too intense for the normal groups. So Christopher stopped trying to fit. He started building instead of belonging. He built a business at 16, built a skill set that made him valuable regardless of likability, built a life that didn't require anyone's permission or approval. By 28, Christopher was financially independent, emotionally self-sufficient, and completely unbothered by others' opinions. Meanwhile, his former classmates, the ones who'd rejected him, were still trapped in the same approval-seeking patterns that had peaked in high school. Rejection forged your independence in 4 critical ways. First, it taught you that you don't need to be chosen. You can choose yourself. Second, it showed you that exclusion from the group often means inclusion in something better. Third, it proved that other people's rejection says more about their limitations than your value. Fourth, it gave you the ultimate freedom, the freedom to be exactly who you are without modification. You don't perform for audiences because the audience rejected the real you anyway. You don't seek inclusion because exclusion taught you that you're complete alone. You don't need validation because rejection immunized you against its absence. Rejection hurt you once, but it freed you forever. And a free man in a world of approval seekers, that's not just independence, that's dominance. 6. The absence that created presence. Something was missing in your childhood. Maybe it was a father who left or never really showed up. Maybe it was a mother too overwhelmed to see you. Maybe it was friends, stability, safety, or love. Maybe it was all of them at once. A perfect storm of absence that left you standing in empty rooms, waiting for someone who never came. That absence wasn't just painful, it was defining. You remember those moments, don't you? Coming home to an empty house day after day, sitting at school events where other kids had parents cheering and you had an empty seat, watching families laugh together and wondering why yours was just quiet, or broken, or gone. The absence wasn't subtle, it was a presence of its own, a heavy, suffocating presence that filled every space where love and connection should have been. Most people spend their entire lives trying to get others to fill what was missing. They seek romantic partners to play parent. They seek friends to provide the family they never had. They seek bosses to give them the approval their father never offered. They seek external sources to pump validation into internal emptiness. They become emotional vampires, draining everyone around them in a desperate attempt to fill a void that can't be filled from the outside. It never works. The void stays void. The absence stays absent. Because here's the brutal truth about childhood absence. No amount of adult attention will ever heal a child's wound. The little boy or girl inside you who needed someone, they're gone. That moment passed. And spending your adult life trying to resurrect that moment through other people is like trying to water a dead plant, pointless and pathetic. But you learned something different, something most men never learn. You learned that absence doesn't have to be filled by others. It can be filled by yourself. Not in some self-help, love yourself cliché way where you stand in front of a mirror saying affirmations, but in the most practical, powerful, transformative sense. You learned to become what you needed. The father who wasn't there, you became your own father. You provided your own discipline when your impulses wanted to destroy you. You set your own standards when no one else cared about your success. You gave yourself the tough love that pushes men to greatness. You didn't wait for someone to tell you right from wrong. You figured it out through painful trial and error, and the lessons stuck because you paid for them with your own consequences. The mother who couldn't nurture. You learned to nurture yourself, not in a soft way, but in the way that matters. You learned to take care of your own needs. You learned to feed yourself, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. You learned to comfort yourself when the world was harsh. You learned to be your own safe place when everywhere else felt dangerous. The friends who weren't present, you became your own company. You learned to be comfortable in solitude that would drive others to madness. You learned to entertain your own mind, to enjoy your own thoughts, to find peace in your own presence. While other people panic after 15 minutes alone, you can sit with yourself for days and feel nothing but contentment. Let me tell you about Michael's story in detail, because it illustrates this perfectly. His father left when he was 7, just walked out one morning and never came back. No explanation, no goodbye, just absence. His mother, devastated and desperate, worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. She left at 6 in the morning and came home at 11 at night. Michael saw her for maybe 30 minutes a day, and she was too exhausted for anything beyond basic check-ins. Michael raised himself. He was 9 years old, setting his own bedtimes. 10 years old, making his own rules about homework, about behavior, about what kind of person he wanted to be. 11 years old, teaching himself right from wrong through trial and painful error. No one was there to guide him, so he became his own guide. No one was there to discipline him, so he learned self-discipline or suffered the consequences. By the time Michael was 16, something extraordinary had happened. He had a level of self-governance that men twice his age hadn't developed. He didn't need external enforcement to do the right thing. He had internalized the entire enforcement mechanism. He didn't need someone to hold him accountable. He held himself to standards that were higher than anything external accountability could impose. But here's where it gets really interesting. That absence created a presence. Because Michael had to be his own authority, he developed an internal authority that was unshakable. When he spoke, people listened, not because he was loud, but because his words carried the weight of someone who'd governed himself successfully for years. Because he had to parent himself, he developed self-discipline that didn't require external enforcement. He could commit to goals and follow through without needing cheerleaders, accountability partners, or motivational speakers. Because he had to fill his own absence, he became so complete in himself that his presence became magnetic. You've felt this power, haven't you? When you walk into a room, people notice. Not because you're trying to be noticed, you're probably not even thinking about them, but because you carry a completeness that's rare in a world full of incomplete people. You're not scanning the room for validation. You're not performing for attention. You're not seeking, not wanting, not needing. You're just there, fully present, undistracted, complete, and that presence is powerful precisely because it's so uncommon. Think about most people you encounter. They're not really present. They're thinking about how they're being perceived. They're wondering if people like them. They're performing a version of themselves they think others want to see. They're distracted by 1,000 insecurities and needs. Even when they're physically in the room, they're mentally somewhere else, in the past seeking what they didn't get, or in the future anxious about what they might not receive. But you're actually here, now, present. Not because you're enlightened or meditative, but because you're not distracted by seeking external validation. You already learned to give yourself what you need, so while everyone else is performing and seeking and needing, you're just being. And that being, that simple, complete, undistracted presence, commands attention without seeking it. The absence in your childhood created 3 specific powers that most men never develop. First, it created absolute self-sufficiency. You provide for yourself what others wait their entire lives for someone else to give. You don't need a partner to make you feel whole. You're already whole. You don't need friends to feel validated. You validate yourself. You don't need a boss to tell you you're valuable. You know your value because you built it yourself. This isn't arrogance. This is architecture. You constructed yourself brick by brick in the absence of any blueprint, and the structure you built is solid. Second, it created unshakable internal authority. Most men are ruled by external authorities: parents, bosses, society, peer pressure, cultural expectations. They're constantly looking outside themselves for permission, for direction, for approval. You don't, because you learned early that external authority is unreliable. It leaves, it fails, it disappoints. So you built an internal authority structure that doesn't need external reinforcement. You set your own standards, you enforce your own rules, you answer to yourself first, and that internal accountability is stricter than any external accountability could ever be. Third, and most importantly, it created commanding presence. You walk into rooms and conversations with a completeness that's magnetic. People are drawn to you not because you're trying to attract them, but because you're not trying to extract anything from them. You're not an emotional vampire draining others to fill your voids. You're a complete system that doesn't need outside energy to function. And in a world full of needy people, that self-sufficiency is magnetic. Here's what happened on a deeper level. The absence forced you to develop an internal parent, an internal friend, an internal source of everything you needed. You had conversations with yourself that other people have with therapists. You gave yourself pep talks that other people need from coaches. You provided yourself comfort that other people seek from partners. You became a one-person support system. And once you became that, once you became complete unto yourself, something shifted. The absence that had defined you suddenly became irrelevant. The void that had hurt you was now filled, not by someone else, but by you. You became your own source. Other men are still chasing ghosts, still trying to get from romantic partners what their parents didn't give them, still trying to get from friends what their siblings didn't provide, still trying to get from success what their fathers didn't offer. Approval, pride, recognition. They're running on a treadmill, chasing an external solution to an internal problem. And they'll run forever because the solution doesn't exist outside themselves. You stopped running, you stopped chasing, you became what you needed. And in becoming complete, you became dangerous. Not dangerous in violence or malice, but dangerous in the most profound sense. You're a man who can't be controlled through absence. You can't be manipulated with withdrawal. You can't be managed through the threat of abandonment, because you've already experienced the ultimate absence, and you not only survived it, you used it to build something stronger than presence ever could have created. The father who left, he thought he was taking something from you. He was actually giving you a gift, the necessity to become your own father, which made you a better man than he ever was. The mother who wasn't there, she thought she was failing you. She was actually creating in you a self-sufficiency that would make you unstoppable. The friends who excluded you, they thought they were rejecting you. They were actually forcing you to develop a completeness that would eventually make you irreplaceable to the people who matter. The absence hurt. God, did it hurt. Those empty rooms, those lonely nights, those moments when you desperately needed someone and no one came, they carved wounds so deep that parts of you still bleed. But those wounds also carved space, space for growth, space for self-development, space for you to become not just a man, but a complete system, self-governing, self-sufficient, self-validating. And now you carry that completeness like a weapon. Not a weapon you use against others, but a weapon against manipulation, against neediness, against the emotional extortion that rules most people's lives. You can't be controlled because you don't need. You can't be manipulated because you don't seek. You can't be managed because you've already managed yourself successfully for years. The absence created presence. The void created fullness. The missing piece created a whole man, and that man, complete, present, undistracted by the neediness that drives others, that man is what every Sigma male becomes when childhood absence is transformed from a wound into a weapon. You stand in rooms now and people feel it. They don't know what it is, but they feel it. That's not confidence. Confidence can be faked. That's not arrogance. Arrogance is just insecurity in disguise. What they're feeling is completeness. They're feeling the presence of someone who isn't looking for anything from them. Someone who isn't performing or seeking or needing. Someone who is simply, undeniably, powerfully present. The absence that should have destroyed you instead created you, and what it created is unstoppable. 6 chapters, 6 wounds, 6 weapons. You've just walked through the painful blueprint of every Sigma male's childhood. The silence that others mistook for weakness became your greatest strength. The betrayals that broke your trust taught you discernment. The loneliness that isolated you built an unshakable foundation of self-reliance. The pain that hurt you sharpened your ability to read people and situations. The rejection that excluded you forged an independence that no one can touch. And the absence, whether of a father, a friend, or simple belonging, created a presence so powerful that you command rooms without saying a word. Here's what most men will never understand. They're still seeking the approval they got in childhood. You're not. You stopped seeking it the day you realized no one was coming to save you. That day, you became unsavable because you'd already saved yourself. Your childhood wasn't fair. It wasn't easy. But it was necessary. Every Sigma male is forged in fire that others couldn't survive. And now you walk through a world of men still crying for their mothers while you've already become your own father, your own friend, your own validation. If this resonated with you, if you saw yourself in these chapters, then you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel because we speak the language others are afraid to learn. The language of painful truth, uncomfortable growth, and solitary excellence. Welcome to the brotherhood of men who were broken young and rebuilt themselves into something unbreakable. The journey continues. We'll see you in the next one.